Hi, everybody. This is Matt Ostanik with the Grateful Giving Foundation. I'm very excited to have our guest here today, Drew Moser with the Lucky Duck Foundation in San Diego, California, to talk to us about the amazing work that his organization does. Drew, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Drew, can you tell us more about your organization? I'd love to have you share the mission as a starting point for it. I know quite a bit about it, which is why I was excited to invite you as a guest on this. But for others that are listening to this, they won't know anything. So we'd love to have you tell us more about the mission first.
Sure. The mission of the Lucky Duck Foundation is to prevent and alleviate the suffering of homelessness throughout San Diego County. And the mantra is to share your luck. If you consider yourself to have had some good luck and fortune in your life, share that luck with those in need. And one way that we encourage that is our co-founders personally match all donations up to $1.5 million per year. And it supports a multitude of programs, but bottom line is we're about how can we help people as quickly, humanely, cost effectively as possible, move off the streets or avoid homelessness altogether.
That's terrific. What is your role with the organization?
I'm the CEO.
And can you tell us just a little bit more, like how long have you been involved with it and what's the history? It's such an interesting name to call it Lucky Duck as well. I appreciate what you shared about
Yeah,
the founders, their commitment, but what's the history with that, the organization, and then when you got involved as well?
yeah, that's usually one of the first questions is where does the name come from? And our co-founders, their last name is Kilkenny, so you can probably guess with the last name like that, there's some Irish heritage. So luck of the Irish. And then Pat, our chairman, he is an Oregon Duck through and through. He went to school at Oregon, major benefactor of the university, especially athletics. And then he was actually their athletic director for several years, totally pro bono to do some pretty impactful things up there in Eugene. And so luck of the Irish and Oregon Ducks. And that's also where the mantra comes from, is to share your luck. To aid those in need. So that's where the name comes from. They started it in 2005 within one of Pat's insurance companies, and Pat essentially said, I could write a check to charity, but that's and a pretty substantial one at that. But he said that's not good enough. Let's get our friends and family together and tell them whatever they contribute, we will match, so we can significantly increase our impact. So for about a dozen or so years, they'd host an annual fundraiser, raise a considerable sum, identify one or two causes close to their heart, benefit that organization, then they close up shop until the next year. In 2016, the late owner of the Padres, San Diego Padres Major League Baseball team, Peter Seidler, saw the issue of homelessness getting out of hand. He saw very little organization of resources or leadership at the government levels to actually go out and help people. And he teamed up with a guy by the name of Dan Shea, a longtime business and civic leader in San Diego, and said, the private sector needs to do something. Will you help me? And Dan said, well, I don't know anything about homelessness. And Peter said, well, I don't either, but we need to do something. So let's quietly study the issue and inform ourselves, and then we can do everything in our power to make a difference. So Peter and Dan organized a weekly meeting starting in 2016 on Tuesdays that they called the Tuesday Group. And they brought other credible, successful business people in. It was invite only. It was a very small group and still is a small group. But they brought Pat and Stephanie Kilkenny, the Lucky Duck Foundation co-founders, into those discussions. And early on, Peter and Dan realized we're going to need a 501c3 to raise money to then fund some of these various strategies we're talking about implementing, and said, Pat and Stephanie, would you consider making homelessness the sole emphasis of the Lucky Duck Foundation? And so they thought about it and said, yeah, we think we can have an even bigger impact if we zero in on homelessness. And so that was in 2017. Pretty much immediately thereafter, the foundation purchased and installed several massive industrial tent structures that can go up within months for literally pennies on the dollar compared to the cost of adding or acquiring housing. And those provided shelter for almost 500 people, essentially overnight. And still to this day, those structures provide shelters for nearly 500 people throughout San Diego County. And in that Tuesday meeting, that Tuesday group that Peter and Dan called it, Peter was adamant that the homeless aren't going to take a day off. So we're not going to take a day off either. So that Tuesday group has not missed a weekly meeting since 2016, including all holidays, Christmas Day, New Year's Day, 4th of July, what have you. They're just, I can't say enough good things about our board of directors and the Tuesday group that sincerely care about results. They do not care about credit, and they roll up their sleeves every Tuesday at a minimum to really dive in and determine what can the private sector plus the Lucky Duck Foundation do to instigate political will, to encourage politicians to take action, but also, refuse to operate at the speed of government. And in the meantime, we, fund and activate a number of programs that are designed to have a high and immediate impact. So that may be far more history than you wanted, but that's essentially the history of the organization. And I've been fortunate to be with them for a little over 5.5 years. And I spent, before formally joining them, I spent a year volunteering with them. I told them I can't write checks like you guys can quite yet. It's my goal to someday. But if I can give you what time and the little talent I have to help the cause, I'm happy to. And it's a great group of people that apply business principles to a massive social issue. They have a bias for action, don't care about who's a Democrat or a Republican. They care about following the facts to implement programs that are going to have an immediate impact.
Yeah, that's terrific. What a great history and a committed group of leadership and founders and supporters there to get that rolling as well. Can you tell us more about the community that you serve? And so, everyone knows where San Diego is on the map. Many people have been there. My guess is most people are aware from headlines that homelessness is a major problem, and it feels like it's growing, at least from the way the news reports on it. But for people that are across the country that might hear about this and aren't local to you, tell us more about the challenges, the need that you're trying to fill there, and just kind of give us more context for folks that might not know any of those details because they don't live in the area.
Yeah, it's the 8th largest city in the country. And when Lucky Duck started focusing on homelessness in 2016 or 2017, it had the 4th largest homeless population in the country. It's since gone the encouraging direction of, I think, moving to 5th or maybe 6th, but it's a significant issue here. And when the bridge shelters were installed by Lucky Duck back in 2017, the Lucky Duck put up 2 of those structures. The city actually put up a 3rd one, so that collectively it was almost 700 shelter beds that came online almost overnight. Unsheltered homelessness actually decreased almost 30% over the next 3 years, while it was doing a hockey stick throughout the rest of the state. And so that might give it a little more color on San Diego and homelessness and population size and what we're facing out here. As a foundation, within the last year and a half or so, we took the position that, speaking globally about homelessness isn't really going anywhere. We heard government talking a lot about just the broad homelessness issue. We said, with our precious limited philanthropic resources, let's identify 1 or 2 or 3 focused areas where we can be reasonably confident we're going to actually move the needle and help people. So we identified youth and seniors for several reasons, but youth, unfortunately, half of the chronically homeless adult population were homeless as youth. And so it's essentially, if you can catch those kids while the cement is still wet, as one service provider says, you can completely change the trajectory of their life. It's a short-term fix, but it's also a long-term fix. And they're kids that are resilient. They just need a little bit of support. They need to have someone in their lives that can give them that hope and that confidence and belief in themselves that they can have a much more prosperous life. And there's a whole bunch of examples of what I can tell you we've done in that on the youth space, but that's That's one area that we're facing in San Diego. It's widely accepted on any given night. There's at least 1,500 youth sleeping on the streets. It's heartbreaking. It's way too many youth. On the other end of the spectrum, you have seniors in San Diego County, which unfortunately it's the largest and fastest growing segment of the unsheltered population. Almost a third of the folks that are on the streets are over the age of 55. And then almost half of them are falling onto the streets for the very first time in their life. It's almost purely economic in nature. They're living on a fixed income, and we all know what inflation and the cost of housing is doing, which is, you talk about cost of housing, that's another significant challenge facing San Diego. I think we're in the top 5 in terms of cost of living in the country. And so seniors, very little behavior and mental health issues, very little addiction. It's an economic circumstance. And so with some shallow cash rental subsidies, some assistance on that front, plus some employment navigation. So many of them want to work, but they don't need 40 hours or want 40 hours or a new career. They just want to be able to keep up with the rising housing costs, but yet they open up the want ads in the newspaper to look for a job. That's not exactly how you find a job these days. So combined with some employment navigation, we've been able to keep a good number of seniors in their home that are breaths away from falling onto the streets. So that's hopefully paints a little bit better picture of the issue within San Diego itself.
Yeah, thank you. That's great context. I'm trying to be thoughtful of my word choice. It's great and it's terrible, right? In terms of how pressing
Yeah.
the challenge is and the needs of some of those segments of it as well. So can you tell us more about the specific work that your organization does? So you've mentioned the temporary housing structures and temporary housing. Is that the main initiative? Are there others? Like, how would you break out the main things
Yeah,
of
it's hard to be
what you do today? Yeah.
concise. It's hard to be concise. In my mind, everything that we do falls into 3 buckets. The
Yeah.
first is programs that the Lucky Duck Foundation owns and operates ourselves. So like the bridge shelters that I mentioned, that's one of them. We purchase those assets, we own those assets. It's a service provider comes in and operates them on a daily basis, but that's one example. We have a cash for trash program that pays people $2 for every bag of trash that they clean up from their encampments in the city streets. That's removed over 200 tons of trash in downtown San Diego alone. We have a food and water outreach program that's distributed almost 2 million meals throughout the county, where we purchase the meals, cold, non-perishable meals. We pack the meals with volunteers, and then we provide them to 20 or 30 different organizations to then take those meals and distribute them on the streets, with really two reasons: to give people some sustenance and hydration, but secondly, as a way to use those meals to build trust and rapport and relationship to help people move off the streets. We have a Lucky Ducklings program. It's all about engaging high school youth. It's actually an award-winning program. Youth that want to advance Lucky Duck's mission through volunteerism, fundraising, designing their own programs, etc. Those are a few examples of the first bucket that I consider ongoing Lucky Duck Foundation programs. The second bucket is strategic collaborations coupled with funding. So it's not just providing funding to organizations, but it's being very deliberate about identifying opportunities where we can all come together and row in the same direction to drive results. I'll give you, a handful of examples within this bucket. We've funded more than 25 different employment and job training opportunities that have benefited well over 1,000 people. One of those programs hires shelter residents at the Salvation Army as food rescue route drivers. Feeding San Diego then provides a vehicle plus all the grocery stores, all the rescue routes of where food can be retrieved from. And then funding from the Lucky Duck Foundation covers all the wages plus the gas and the maintenance and the insurance to make the program go. Well, that program's rescued over 700,000 pounds of food, and just about every person that's gone through it has secured long-term employment, and they're still housed. So none of us could do that program on our own, but by coming together and leveraging our strong suits, we can create some pretty powerful outcomes And that program ultimately, the rescue food ultimately benefits those who are homeless or on the brink. So it's really a win for all parties. Another example in that bucket is something that's called Timmy's Place. It's a pizzeria and a print shop that trains and employs homeless youth at a youth homeless center downtown. And there was 4 different organizations that came together to make that one. We had a group that raises money every year for a cause. They came to us and said, we want to make Lucky Duck the beneficiary. We want you to do something that's going to move the needle with it. They also had this idea of, hey, cafe. We know this is kind of pie in the sky, but would there be a cafe type of opportunity where folks could be employed and sit down and build relationships and that whole deal? Well, we knew that there was a youth service provider or a youth shelter with transitional housing that had some additional space downtown. And we also knew an organization that uh, operating cafes by employing youth, that's sort of their bread and butter. So we brought those 3 other entities together, had a hearty discussion, really, dissected the numbers to understand what could or couldn't be possible, and everything lined up. And so a little over a year ago, Timmy's Place opened. To our knowledge, it's the only pizzeria of its kind that trains and employs homeless youth, and already well over 30 youth have been employed. I think they've earned well over $150,000 in wages. And these are kids that oftentimes that's their very first job. I mean, they're coming in from the streets. They've never been employed. They're trying to put some pretty challenged circumstances behind them, and it's a great program. So, and there's 50 other examples I could cite in the second bucket of, again, those strategic collaborations plus some funding. The third bucket is more of an intangible one. It's our group trying to take a leadership role in unifying the region, to help it have a more collaborative, unified front when addressing homelessness. And one way we do that is, I could give you several examples, but one way we endeavor to do that is something called Shamrocks and Shipwrecks, which is a public scoring system meant to grade political will and effectiveness of elected officials throughout San Diego County. Good actions, good programs that can and should be replicated get shamrocks, and inaction or ineffectiveness or running from the problem, those get shipwrecks. And it's all fully public on our website, and we send it out to our email subscribers. We send it out to the media if we think it warrants that, and it's all meant to compel political will and action of government in a practical way to help the far too many people that are suffering out on the streets. And then there's the Tuesday group that falls in within that bucket. And then we regularly host homeless symposiums, which get all the key leaders and organizations in the same room, dialoguing and focused on a specific topic. And because it can be a very disjointed system. And so we don't care about credit. It's like I tell people, if the politicians are taking meaningful steps forward, we'll be the first to pat them on the back. But if the effort's lacking, the pat on the back is going to be lower and harder. And we're not afraid to, whether it's Shamrocks and Shipwrecks or by holding a press conference or what have you, to just present the facts and say, let's have a discussion about this, about why this or that is or isn't happening. So again, it's hard to be concise, but those are, in my view, the 3 buckets. And if I was to try to boil all that down into one sentence, it's, we raise money to fund, activate, or lead homeless programs that are designed to have an immediate impact and that are tangible and measurable.
Yeah, that's terrific. Thank you. Lots of things. I mean, it's complicated, right? As you know, but far better than I even. It's complicated. Lots of things. How you got a curiosity question I didn't think I asked before, but how big is your organization? I mean, just one of the things you mentioned feels like a huge effort, but you've got all these things going on, and you've got more going on than you even mentioned as well. How big is the staff? How many volunteers are involved? And what does it take to do all those things? Because it feels like you're doing a lot.
Yeah, we have a staff of 2.5 people. We've got a solid volunteer base. The Tuesday group is active. Our board of directors are active, but so much of what I just described is based on collaboration. It's based on coming together and leveraging organizations' strong suits to go out and have a bigger impact. So none of what I just described happens without, first and foremost, our donors, but secondly, the Tuesday group, the board of directors, of volunteers, the many volunteers that we have, but then also the many organizations that we partner with. I don't even think I touched on the winter coats that transform into sleeping bags that we've purchased and distributed over 12,000 of those over the last 3 or 4 winters. Those are actually made by formerly homeless parents who are employed to manufacture them. Well, we don't have the capacity to go out and distribute 12,000 coats on the streets. And so that's where we work with 20 to 30 different organizations that are doing that outreach work, that have shelters, they to a certain extent have housing. We'll underwrite the cost entirely to make those jackets available, but then they're distributed through those collaborations. And one last, I'm sorry, I'm probably being way too wordy here, but one last point on the sleeping bag coats, now that we've been doing it for a few years, is we've had several folks that have come forward who are now housed, they're employed, they're back on their feet, and they've pointed to those coats and said that thing saved my life. It literally saved my life. I wouldn't be here without it. And so that's just one way. It's one way to provide just a little bit of warmth and protection from the streets while we push on government to stand up more shelters and inclement weather shelters to help people at a minimum move off the streets, move inside, and get a roof over their heads. So yeah, so much of what we do is about collaboration.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, what an amazing impact with the group that you've got as well. What are the challenges that you face as a nonprofit, as an organization? You talked about the challenges for the community you serve and the individual people, but for your organization, what are the biggest challenges you're working on currently?
Well, it's we're all about immediate pathways off the streets, and that always sounds good to people until you tell them that something's being proposed a block away or a few blocks away from where they live. And so that can be a challenge, but then you got the you know government machine, I'll call it, that doesn't move maybe as quickly as we like to move, or as quickly as the private sector moves, or as quickly as people that are suffering on the streets and need help. And so when you look at a place like San Diego, you've got ocean to the west, military to the north, a foreign country to the south, and mountains to the east. It's unlike other places in the country where you've got a lot of land and the cost to add housing or shelters is a lot more manageable. San Diego requires, I think, a much different approach to stand up some of those bridge shelters I covered earlier, but also convert underutilized government-owned properties, that vacant buildings that have just been sitting there for years, those can be transformed pretty quickly and also cost effectively. Those are the types of things that are easier said than done. We've had some success, but for the success we've had with adding those types of strategies, it's not nearly as much as we would like to see for some of those reasons I just described.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How do people from our audience that will listen to this, how do they learn more about your organization and how can they support you?
LuckyDuckFoundation.org. There's a lot more information on our website. There's a button that says share your luck, and that will drop down, and there's ways to share your treasure if you want to support monetarily. There's ways to share your time if you want to volunteer. There's a whole bunch of ways to plug in and get involved. And we talk about, we know we're never going to solve homelessness, but we do believe we can make a meaningful dent in the issue. And the way that happens is by everybody owning their small piece of the puzzle and doing their small part. Even as something as simple as the coffee drinkers out there that are listening, we have something that's called the Lucky Duck Coffee Club. And think along the lines of Newman salad dressings, where profits go to charity. We've partnered with a company, a coffee company called Tower Coffee, that donates at least 30% of every sale to support our mission. So it's coffee that truly has an impact. So, you know, the mom and pops that are sitting at home that enjoy a cup of coffee every day, or better yet, if there's companies out there that are already buying coffee for their employees or their customers or thank you gifts or what have you, we're going to encourage people to support the Lucky Duck Coffee Club if you're already incurring that cost, because it truly does benefit those in need. So that's at luckyduckcoffeeclub.org, but all of this and much more can be found on our website.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I'll give my personal testimonial. As you already know, try the coffee. It's terrific as well. An innovative way to support you, but also very
Thank
good
you.
coffee as well. So a nice big win
Thank
on
you.
that. So last question for me. What advice would you give to other people that want to make more of an impact, whether it's in San Diego or any other community? You know, a lot of our audience for this are grateful giving volunteers and supporters who, a common theme, want to do more to make an impact. And I caught when you said earlier, you started as a volunteer with your organization as well. So you were someone even earlier days seeking to make an impact, maybe before you got into it full time. But what advice would you give generally for people that want to do more in their own communities?
That's exactly what I'd say, is think of a, you know, cause that's important to you or close to your heart, and then just go out and start volunteering. It's a great way to be hands-on and get in the trenches, so to speak, learn about the issue, learn about the organizations working to address that issue. And in my view, through volunteerism, there's a whole bunch of doors that can open. And, you know, we've got quite a few folks who have become donors who started as volunteers because they just wanted to sort of wade in and get a feel for the issue of homelessness, get a feel for the Lucky Duck Foundation, and so what starts as giving time turns into giving treasure. But the flip side of that is, if you start volunteering, you realize, wow, this organization actually isn't impactful, or oh, this issue actually, you know, isn't important to me. So I think it's a great way to get involved and figure out pretty quickly whether it lines up with, you know, your priorities of how you want to try to make the world a better place.
Yeah, that's terrific. Thank you. That was it for my official list of questions. We have a few other members of the Grateful Giving team and our community and network on here with Lisa and Elizabeth and Madeline. If you have any follow-up questions for Drew before we wrap up?
Hi, Drew. This is Madeline Bayless, and one of my interest points in coming on today is I also serve as a CASA, which is court-appointed special advocate, and have seen firsthand with my youth who's aging out and others. So your focus on youth is critical. I'm curious, in your own community, you talked about those percentages of youth. Are most of them coming out of being part of the system, or is it they reach, you know, adult and they're on their own by, you know, their family guidelines, and hey, if you're old enough to go and work, you got to be support yourself? What are you seeing in your youth population there?
A little bit of everything that you just described. A lot of it's kids that are coming out of the foster care system that essentially fall off a cliff and don't have a place to go and don't have that support system. You've got some kids that maybe aren't welcome at home for whatever reason, that are looking for a brighter path. You've got some folks who are, you know, come from violent or troubled circumstances that are unfathomable, frankly. And so it's a little bit of everything. And you know, to your point about the CASA program, it's a great program. It's impactful. We actually have a program that's modeled in part by the CASA program. It's called Be a Friend, and it trains volunteers about all things homelessness, and then it connects or it pairs them with someone who's on the streets or in shelter and trying to put homelessness behind them. And that power of connection and one-on-one relationship is significant. And that's really what those kids, or anybody really, but that's really what youth need, is that knowing that someone's got their back, that oftentimes sees something in themselves that they don't see, that helps them, get to places they thought were maybe maybe out of reach. So it's, again, it's a little bit of everything, but that power of relationship and just surrounding them with folks that give them hope is critical.
Have you seen solutions or talked in your Tuesday group of solutions that fall in between we have to get them affordable housing, i.e. the financial factor, and it's got to be more than shelter because that temporary life has marked their instability before? Is there anything that you've come up with that's in between?
In between transitional housing and shelter, is that what you're talking about?
In transitional and affordable housing where, they can get on the list and, as a person not making a lot in their first jobs, they can get vouchers and all of that. But is there anything you've seen in between?
Yeah, we're actually looking at a prevention program right now that would support kids as they come out of foster care with it'd be an additional cash stipend provided they're taking the necessary steps to go get the employment to pursue their education that would help them after they're done with that 12 or 24-month runway, give them the resources that they need to get into their own apartment and fly the coop, so to speak. That one's a little more unproven, I'll call it, but it's something that we're looking at. We've also seen a lot of success with just trades programs that if you're talking specifically about housing, it's challenged. I don't know that there's a great bridge between transitional and affordable, other than helping kids get connected to those employment opportunities that give them the livable wage jobs, so that they can be in a place where they can afford housing. But it's, especially in San Diego, it can be really challenging to find something that's affordable in the first place. So I'd say there's room for opportunity with what you just described.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madeline. Any other questions?
Hi, this is Elizabeth. I'm curious, I know you're doing 1,000 things at once. Do you get involved in advocating local government for additional investment in affordable housing?
I wouldn't say advocating around housing. That's not totally our lane. What we've advocated for in the past is converting government-owned properties to shelter. And I tell you a story about trying to push on the previous mayor to do that, which ultimately it came to fruition. Where we've seen some success on the housing front is a model called YIGBY, stands for Yes in God's Backyard, which essentially goes after the faith-based community to use their parking lots and unused assets to add housing on. And we supported an effort there to add, I think it's 22 housing units in Southeast San Diego, I believe it is. And those units are coming online, don't quote me on this, but I think around $250,000 to $300,000 per unit, when now the going rate's 2 to 3 times that, or maybe 3 to 4 times that. And so there's potential there. But advocating for affordable housing or housing in general hasn't necessarily been our lane. We think housing is an ideal outcome, but it's years, if not decades away. We're focused on the here and the now, and how can we help people move off the streets immediately. And we try to let the other housing experts focus in on and advocate for additional housing.
That makes sense. Thank you. if there's no other questions, and those were great questions, Madeline and Elizabeth, thank you very much. We will wrap up today. Drew, I really appreciate your time. Well, I appreciate the work that you do in the community, your leadership and the organization you lead. And I appreciate your time today to share more of the story with the rest of us as well. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Have a good rest of the day. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, you too.